that he has found the time to return to us and join us here today. His presence reflects the significance of the work we are doing here in Guyana and on the global attention it continues to receive. Today's event will begin with a speech from His Excellency the President, followed by remarks from Mr. Solem, and we'll conclude with an engagement between our Vice President, Dr. Jacquio, and Mr. Solem. Thank you all for being here as we reflect on our collective achievement and look forward to our even greater success ahead. Thank you so much. Please allow us as we welcome His Excellency to the podium.
Thank you very much. Please have your seats. Thank you very much. Our guest of honor, Eric Soline, Vice President, members of Cabinet, members of the diplomatic community, distinguished members of civil society, the private sector, the National Tushao Council Chair, other members of the National Tushao Council, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This afternoon we are here to celebrate, really, to acknowledge, to celebrate, and to define who we are, what we stood for, what we continue to stand for, and what is it we project as a country and as a people. I wish to have a brief discourse this afternoon outlining the journey to where we are today, the relationship that enhanced that journey, the relationship that cemented that journey, the results, and now the standard, the policy framework, and the future that we set ourselves. Relationships are important in shaping global policy making. And relationships in global policy making cannot be a relationship for a season or a moment in time. It has to be a relationship that is built on shared values, relationship that is shaped by the development of ideas, nurturing of ideas, and the positioning of those ideas to meet some challenge, to overcome some challenge, and to lay a framework through which best practice can be achieved by stakeholders globally. And this is exactly what the journey is and how it started. Eric, the Vice President, the local team, and members of the international community then embarked on this journey. 15 years ago, if I reflect, I see Sham Nocta here too, other members of the LCDS group, if we reflect, many of us were technicians. And some of us were already in the cabinet. And what we saw 15 years ago was a generation of an idea. Before any vision is created, there must be an idea. But when that idea is a global idea, it requires partnership. It requires fighters for that idea. It requires backers, by Jagdeo, that our forest was a natural and national asset that was playing a key role globally. But that role the forest was playing here and the forests in other parts of the world was not acknowledged. There was little or no acknowledgement of the role of the forest in the climate equation. It is the work by Guyana, with support from friends like Eric in Norway, King Charles, that led to attention coming to forests and the role forest plays in the climate equation. So we must understand that. Guyana was a major part of ensuring the position and role of forests is understood and also is acknowledged. And I think we must applaud that. It is in this context that the Guyana Low Carbon Development Strategy was birthed. As I said, our then president, who earned the title of Champion of the Earth, has set out a bold vision for our country. And this vision included a plan that sought to create a global market for the protection of tropical rainforests, whilst advancing sustainable development. It was ambitious, it was world-leading, it was imaginative, it was asserting the fact that Guyana could lead the world in finding solutions to global problems. Today, our commitment to global policy making remains constant. Not only we believe that we can help in shaping ideas and policies to find global solutions for problems like climate, food, and energy, but we believe that we can craft and develop these ideas into economic models that can work and work in the favor of people. Now, as president, I have the privilege of interacting with leaders, stakeholders from across the world who were part of that process. And I have a better understanding now of how far-sighted and visionary was the idea of the LCDS. Because today, the LCDS is not only acknowledged as a development model, but today the LCDS is part of a global strategy in combating climate change, in developing economic strategy, and in positioning countries, to the extent that we are co-chairing many international organizations in the Commonwealth on forests. We are working with international stakeholders and partners on positioning global tropical forests to be part of what we have already achieved. We have really, in this journey, set the benchmark and set the best practices when it comes to forest governance, forest management, and the deployment of forests at a jurisdictional scale to meet this global challenge. The model of the LCDS as its core remains vital for the opportunities and challenges we face today. But as I said, this journey is one in which partnership were nurtured, in which partnership were built, and in which friends were created, and those friends remain by our side today. And Eric, you are one such friend that we welcome back here to Guyana today. But we understood when we came back in office in 2020 that the LCDS was a document that was alive. It was not a policy that was academic in nature. It was a policy that was alive and that had intentionally the scope for expansion. And what we did, we decided to make the LCDS the foundational pillar through which the economic expansion and development of Guyana would take place. And we launched an expanded LCDS that is referred to today as the LCDS 2030. The launch of this expanded LCDS was no different from the way the LCDS was conceptualized and developed in the first instance. The process of finalizing the document saw months of consultation all across the country. Consultation on the existing LCDS and consultation on the priorities for the new LCDS, LCDS 2030. And in July 2022, LCDS 2030 was finalized. And here we are 2 years later with much progress to reflect on. I want to thank our two shows, the leaders of the communities, the village councils, the villages, the various stakeholders, the mining sector, the forestry sector, all of whom were integral in the consultation and finalization of this document. While the vast bulk of the credit for progress since the vision was first set out should go to the people of Guyana, I would like to also acknowledge the support of a few key partners who have been with us on this journey. I'm delighted to welcome back one such partner, as I said, Eric Solheim, the Norwegian Minister of Environment and Development, who signed the Guyana-Norway Agreement in 2009. Eric, your leadership was truly inspiring and invaluable. We are happy and thankful that the world had people like you who had the vision, the foresight, the understanding of the complexity of the problem, but more importantly, the will to do something. And by signing that agreement with Guyana, you made your mark and you did something. I also want to express my deep gratitude to King Charles, who I will have the opportunity of doing so shortly, personally, who has been a steadfast supporter of Guyana's effort to protect its forests and promote sustainability since 2008. His Prince Rainforest project was ahead of its time, making the case for paying for climate services that tropical forests provide. His unwavering support, dedication, commitment, and selfless position definitely led to the success of the LCDS. For those of us who are old enough, we recall the images of then Vice President and King Charles walking through gardens and discussing and talking about LCDS. And those who are close enough would know the Vice President has a distinction of being the first person to ask for a takeaway box from the palace. We look forward for the continuing support and work now with the King's Foundation, especially in the area of sustainable urban development. Today, and I think we have members of the King's Foundation here with us. You may stand so we can see you. Today, our work continues to expand, and as part of the LCDS 2030 vision, that is the renewal of the city, the renewal of new areas, and development of new growth poles and growth areas, the beautification of our city and country, the expansion of urban planning, the revival of urban planning, the drainage and irrigation aspect of the city, addressing flooding, all of that is part of the LCDS 2030 vision. And today, we are very pleased that we have established a strong partnership with the King's Foundation in the renewal of Georgetown, the city of Georgetown, and we are working on various projects to enhance the city of Georgetown and give it back that title of the Garden City of the world. Both Eric and King Charles represent the kind of bold leadership and meaningful partnership the world needs today. And I would add, our Vice President is also part of that bold leadership more than 15 years ago that steered the world attention to this important area of forests and forest management. But the key message from 15 years ago remain as true today as they were then. One, transformative progress is possible when developing countries lead the way in finding solutions. Many times we believe, and frankly speaking, we portray ourselves as problem to the world. You know, when we create undemocratic conditions, we present ourselves as problem to the world. The world has to solve our issue. But when we adopt best practices, when we in the developing world can generate ideas and find solutions, most times we become champions of our own destiny. But however, real solution requires hard work, tough decision, and decisive action. Those of you who are acquainted with the LCDS would know that it was not only hard work, it was tough decisions. It was decisive action. It was convincing local and international stakeholders that the model is easy to write an academic paper. You know, if you're doing a thesis for a PhD and you're doing an academic paper based on theory, it's easy. But when you have to develop a model and prove the model, that is real work. That is real work. Not proving other people's theory, proving your own theory, proving your own model, developing your own model, and then showing that a model is functional and can work. That is real painstaking work. And that is the difference between most people who are in academia and most people who are practitioners. Because you have to make the model work. So, we were part of this global solution to a problem that the world confronted. So if we look at the world today, we can see that leadership in climate action is increasingly coming from the global south. Now, if we look at the investment profile of all the countries in the world, whether they're the large companies, the global south, whether it's Central America, South America, let's examine it factually and match rhetoric with action. Let us see who are making the most investments in renewable energy, who are investing the most in research and development for renewable energy, who are setting ambitious climate targets and actually working towards the achievement of those climate targets. We are part of some global initiatives also that are worth celebrating. For example, India, through its International Solar Alliance, has shown the possibilities of clean energy in developing countries. So as we confront the future, we have to be aware and be conscious that in this global debate on climate, there is a rhetoric, there is the poster boys and girls, and there are those who are taking real action. There are those who are aligning themselves to real action and real outcome. And this debate, for it to make sense and for it to be meaningful from a policy-making matrix, it needs to be frank, open, and transparent. It's not just big nations that we must analyze. We also have to look at what smaller countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America are doing. Because there's a lot that they're doing in stepping up as well. Costa Rica, with its achievement in conservation and renewable energy, Rwanda, a leader in forest restoration, are showing that size does not limit leadership. The Global South is proving that innovative solutions to the climate crisis can and are being driven from all corners of the world. So, it is important for us to do exactly what we're doing today. Identify those best practices identify those ideas and vision that is working, and to bring it to the fore of the discourse, to bring it to the global policy making table so that it is not drowned out or lost in the whole arena of discussion. Despite the flourishing leadership, the Global South efforts are being stymied, and this is also a fact. If you look, for example, at the pledges that were made, and look at the implementation of those pledges, look at the translation from pledges to actual financing, it's shocking. It's shocking to see that translation from pledges to financing. And in financing, what we have seen is really a realignment of existing funds. So funds that were earmarked for projects to alleviate poverty, deal with health and education, are now being restructured to have an environmental component or a climate component, and that is counted against the pledge. We also have to understand that the challenge we face require us to have financing that are concessional. If we have financing, if we are given financing that are not concessional, then it adds to the problem, because most of the countries are already heavily indebted. They're already heavily indebted. They have default on existing loans. That is why here in Guyana, we are also supporting the Bridgetown Initiative by Prime Minister Mia Mottley on reform in financial institutions and reforms in the way finances are given for climate adaptation and mitigation. So here's where the second message comes in. 15 years ago, it was climate skeptics who prevented progress through their denial of the reality of climate change. Today, the biggest obstacle is not merely denial. It is not just climate skeptics. We must confront now the climate posers, those who claim to advocate for climate action and are to the fore in criticizing others, but hide behind simplistic slogans to prevent the more detailed discussions, the more analytical discussions, all while shying away from the hard, detailed work needed to deliver real solution. It is okay for all of us to say we must find a market model for biodiversity. We must find a market model for forest carbon. But are we willing to sit down, lock ourselves in a room, and come up with a detailed model? A model that we will all adopt, a model that we will all support. And that is where the proof of action is. Not saying that we support a model, but committing ourselves to defining that model and then committing ourselves to accepting the model. Nowhere is this more evident than in the debate over oil and gas. Unlike in 2009, Guyana now has oil and gas reserves. Our position on oil has been clear and consistent since 2009, long before we were an oil-producing nation. The LCDS 2030 sets out our detailed stance. We fully support the need for the world to reduce its reliance on fossil fuels. We are committed to being a responsible producer, but the global transition away from fossil fuel must be driven by specific policies that are fair, based on climate science, and economically rational. This is why we have long advocated for carbon pricing and the elimination of fossil fuel subsidies, starting with the richest countries. We've also called for massive investment in clean and renewable energy globally. These are the measures that will drive meaningful progress in decarbonizing the global economy, not empty slogans that seek to shut down opportunities in developing countries while preserving them for wealthier nations. But we also long recognize that whilst about 80% of climate change is caused by fossil fuels, about 20% is not. Specifically, we had been to the fore in advancing for meaningful action on maintaining the world's tropical forests. These forests are critical global assets in this battle. Globally, forests absorb nearly 1/3 of the carbon dioxide released through fossil fuels emissions each year. Guyana forests alone, covering 18 million hectares, sequesters more than 150 million tons of carbon annually. These forests not only regulate our planet's climate, but provide habitat for countless species, protect biodiversity, and sustain the livelihoods of indigenous peoples and communities. Guyana has been a vocal advocate for the global community to act on this critical issue. Since 2009, we have consistently argued that tropical forests must be recognized for their essential role in the fight against climate change. And we have led by example in demonstrating how protecting forests can go hand in hand with economic development. The global community must step up to support these efforts. Forest-rich countries like Guyana cannot bear the responsibility alone. This brings us to the third message, partnerships. Despite the national commitment to the LCDS evident in 2009, we could not have made it a reality without finding a partner who shared our vision. The result in the Guyana-Norway agreement signed by the then President Jagdeo and Minister Eric in 2009, its many implementation challenges often capture the media headlines. But it earned Guyana $227 million for forest climate service in the period 2009 to 2015, much of which is still being invested in renewable energy, Amerindian development, and climate adaptation. As we reflect on these three key messages, developing countries can lead real solutions, but as I said, it requires painstakingly hard work. I encourage you to revisit LCDS 2030 and see how the goals are set out. The first wave of priorities, carbon credit, sustainable forestry and mining, the energy transition, Amerindian and hinterland development, climate adaptation, and biodiversity, has seen major progress in the last 2 years. On carbon credit, Guyana has achieved several world firsts in the last 2 years alone. Guyana has achieved several world firsts. In 2022, we issued the world's first jurisdictional carbon credit under the R3 standard. A few months later, this led to the largest forest carbon credit sale ever in the world, US $750 million with Hess Corporation. So far, we have received $227 million of this, with 100% going into national and local LCDS priorities, and a guaranteed 15% directly managed by Amerindian communities for their development priorities. Then just a few months ago, Guyana's credits were the first in the world to be accepted under CORSIA, the United Nations Aviation Emission Reduction Program. This milestone positions us well for further valuable sales in the months and years ahead. On sustainable forestry and mining, our sustainable forestry practices has also gained global recognition. Guyana was the first Amazon nation to sign a voluntary partnership agreement with the European Union, allowing Europe importers and others to know that our timber is legally and sustainably harvested. By 2025, Guyana's timber will bear PEFC certification, which is an endorsement of the Guyana Forestry Commission work over many years. These milestones open up new high-value market opportunities across the Caribbean and internationally. This is real work. This is real policy making at work. This is reporting the successes of policies. This is an idea transformed into a vision, and a vision transformed into reality. This is what our country needs. My government has also launched a mineral mapping project that uses AI and traditional techniques to precisely locate minerals like lithium, which is crucial to the global energy transition. This will allow mining to continue sustainably with good jobs and economic opportunities being preserved into the future. Now, on lithium, we know the global shortage, Eric, but we must not only look at the extraction in a sustainable way if we go and when we look at the commercial viability. But we must be a part of the manufacturing of the end product. So investors coming in must know that we also want the value-added job creation and job opportunities here in Guyana. Today I met the new High Commissioner of Canada, and I saw a policy from the Canadian government on granting specific incentive for EVs manufactured in Canada and creating specific disincentive for EVs not manufactured in Canada. So once we have the raw material, we have to create that policy matrix, that policy frame that move to value added right here in Guyana. That is what is going to energize the exciting future for our people here and regionally. On the energy transition, Guyana's energy transition is one of the most ambitious in the world. I want to repeat that. Guyana's energy transition is one of the most ambitious in the world. By 2030, our energy use is projected to increase fivefold. Yet, our greenhouse gas emissions will remain flat or decrease. The gas-to-energy project will reduce electricity costs by 50% and generate 300 megawatts of power by 2025. Since 2020, solar energy installation has grown by 173%, and the Guyana project will bring the largest solar farms online by 2025, totaling over 30 megawatts in Berbice, Essequibo, and Linden. Amerindian communities remain central to LCDS 2030. Thanks to the efforts of elected village leaders and members of communities across the country, every village has produced its own village sustainability plan through village-led processes. As a result, over the past 2 years, $9.5 billion from carbon credit, 9.5 billion Guyana dollars from carbon credit has been distributed to 242 villages. This is now funding over 1,300 projects in agriculture, tourism, education, support for youth and the elderly, and other innovative ideas that villages are progressing on. The receipt of carbon credit revenue in the last 2 years is augmented by government support for village development. The Amerindian Land Titling Project, funded by revenue from Guyana-Norway Agreement, has issued 21 absolute grants and 30 certificates of title, almost 50% on its way to the overall targets that we set. We are also bridging the digital divide by building over 200 ICT hubs, with 71 already connected to the internet, 51 of those to high-speed Starlink internet. By the end of 2025, more than 200 ICT hubs will be complete and equipped with Starlink. This will enhance education, give access to online medical services, and create economic development opportunities. On climate adaptation, as we all know, as a low-lying coastal nation, Guyana is particularly vulnerable to climate change. That is why you have made significant investments in climate adaptation, using carbon credit revenue to upgrade drainage systems, including the completion of 45 cocos all across the country, and build 2 high-volume canals to protect agricultural lands from flooding. Hundreds of thousands of our people will benefit from the biggest investment ever made in upgrading this infrastructure. Just as many benefited from the investment in the Kulna Canal funded by the revenues from the Guyana-Norway agreement. So my fellow Guyanese, I hope you will take pride from the progress we are making on these 5 priority areas. I will contrast each with where we were 2 years ago. But we have also been building the foundation for the next wave of LCDS priorities: sustainable urban development, biodiversity conservation, and water management. On sustainable urban development, all our cities and towns, but particularly Georgetown and its surrounding areas, are undergoing rapid transformation at a speed unmatched by most cities in the world. Since my government took office, we have focused on addressing the massive infrastructure deficit we face. We are constructing 4-lane highways, the new Demerara Harbor Bridge, beautification projects, investment in drainage, roads, community infrastructure. These are all adding to the expansion of wealth and creation of a sustainable future for all of us. We have allocated 36,000 house lots and are well on track to reach a 50,000 allocation by next year. This provides us with a basis for the next phase of urban development, and we can all now imagine the Georgetown and Guyana we want to be in. Some say Georgetown could be the next Dubai or Miami, but while we can certainly learn from these cities, we should be proud to craft our own future. Guyana has always been centered around village life, and we must reconcile this heritage with the modernization we want to see. Let us imagine a Georgetown that blends its rich history with cutting-edge infrastructure and technology, a city that is both cosmopolitan and reflective of our values. To make this a reality, several key initiatives will soon start. The cross-cutting nature of this work means that it requires action from local government as well as the central government. But its cross-cutting nature means that it is appropriate that central government funds the work and lead its implementation. Over the next few months, technical work will start to develop 8 key elements for sustainable cities. This will include a vision and urban development framework for Greater Georgetown, a smart code for building design, the continuation of the master plan on Silica City, 2 pilot neighborhood plans, a greenway strategy, and modernized urban maps. At the same time, we are committed to preserving Georgetown's historic core. Once known as the Garden City of the Caribbean, Georgetown is home to beautiful colonial architecture and green spaces. A heritage conservation plan led by the National Trust of Guyana will set out plans for ensuring that history and modernity coexist in harmony. It also guides us on our plans to create spaces, including physical exhibition space and a virtual museum platform to celebrate our history and attract tourism. Part of our plan is also the development of the forest cultural market in this region. On biodiversity conservation, our commitment remains strong as we expand Guyana's protected area and work towards a global goal of conserving 30% of the planet's lands and ocean by 2030. Just a few weeks ago, I spoke of how we'll double Guyana's protected areas by the end of 2025. Kaieteur National Park was the first national park in the Amazon, but we'll show through our protected areas that Guyana has even more to offer in the years ahead. Recently, we launched the Biodiversity Alliance, a global initiative to provide new revenue streams from biodiversity credits and promote the sustainable management of ecosystems, building from our successes with forest climate services. We're also advancing plans to establish an international center for biodiversity in Guyana, biodiversity studies in Guyana, which will serve as a hub for scientific research and conservation in the region. In all of these efforts, technology and innovation will play a critical role, but it will be Guyana's people who will make success happen. We will show once again that our fundamental optimism and belief that we can create our own future, that we can create an even better Guyana, not forgetting where we came from, remaining humble, but looking out to embrace all the opportunities that we can seize today. In 2009, when the then President Barjagdeo set out his vision, he spoke strongly about how Guyana was ready and able to lead and invited the world to join us. Today, as President, I proudly say that we are leading once again. I thank our international partners, but most of all, I pay tribute to the Guyanese up and down the country who have worked to get us to where we are today. There is much left to do, and there will be setbacks along the way, but we can draw inspiration from what we have done to date, acting together as one Guyana. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that general overview on the progress that Guyana have made so far and the global leadership that we have played in fighting climate change. Once again, we need to put our hands together for that great overview. We'll now invite Mr. Eric Solem, who will give us a brief address also. Over to you.
Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, ministers, the people of Georgetown and Guyana. Good morning, Georgetown. How blessed I am to be back in Guyana, this extraordinary, beautiful country with so many good people. I listened carefully to the speech of the President. Such a fresh breath of air. In Europe, when politicians speak, it's as we are in the midst of the Black Death. Just pessimism, just crisis. And here comes a political leader of a nation, and there is opportunities, there is optimism, there is a can-do attitude. Yes, we have challenges, but we can overcome them with good policies. Thank you for that, and please continue on that pathway. I also have to admire, and I think many other people here did, your response when you were on the BBC interview on Hard Talk. I've been there myself. It's not easy to be there, but you push back. No one should come and teach Guyana what to do. If they try to do, push back. That's not the same as Guyana cannot learn from the rest of the world. Obviously, Guyana, as any other nation, can learn from success stories at all continents, for sure. But no one should come here with the arrogance of telling this wonderful, beautiful nation what to do, and particularly not when we come from nations which have caused many more environment problems and concerns than Guyana. So, 15 years ago in Norway, a small nation very far away, we decided that we wanted to make a contribution to conserve the most wonderful of all ecosystems, the rainforest. Look, Colombia, Brazil, Indonesia, Guyana are the most animal and plant-rich nations of the world because the ecosystem of the Amazon and indeed all other rainforests is the most pristine, most precious of all ecosystems. We wanted to make a small contribution. And let me be honest, at the time we didn't think of Guyana. We thought of Brazil, the biggest rainforest nation in the world. We thought of Indonesia, the second biggest rainforest in the world. And we wanted to help them in their concerns. But then the then president of Guyana raised his hand and saying, look, is this really a rational policy? Is this really fair? look, you support Indonesia and Brazil, there was no complaint about that, but you support Brazil and Indonesia because they do have substantial deforestation, which you want to help stop. What about a nation where there has been no deforestation, where deforestation rate is close to zero, which has been wonderfully successful in preserving the nation? Wouldn't it be rational to help that nation grow and prosper? That was the message from President Jagdeo. I took it to heart because I felt it was a wonderful, right message, and that was the background for the deal we made between Guyana and Norway. Look, you give me a lot of praise. I'm very happy for that. But development of every nation in the world, we have learned over the last decades, is a domestic process. No foreigner can develop a nation. Only the people of Guyana can develop Guyana. You may get support from abroad, you may get ideas from abroad, you may get partnerships, but at the end of the day, it's the people of Guyana who develop Guyana. So I really like to thank you, President, Vice President. And yesterday we went to the interior of Guyana, to exactly the same area where we signed the deal back in the days. It was amazing. I was so happy, because sometimes when money is spent, you see no results. But this was exactly the opposite. You can see results everywhere. And thanks to the tour shows, I know you're the head of the tour shows in the area, but also all the people there, that really helped develop the place. What did we see? Well, we saw soccer fields and cricket fields. Well, if young people cannot find entertainment, will they stay on in that part of the world? We saw centers for ICT where local people could connect to Georgetown, but indeed to the entire world. They can connect to China, India, and the United States, sitting there in the interior of Guyana by these ICT centers. We saw huge cow farms providing jobs and prosperity to the local people. We saw improved roads, and we saw any number of initiatives for ecotourism, again, providing jobs. Tourism, by the way, is probably the biggest job creator in the world in this period of time. Sometimes people speak negatively about tourism. Well, look, if you make a car factory, say in China, which is the most advanced place today, there are hardly any staff. It's just robots. But even the smallest of the hotels need a lot of staff, because at this stage we cannot serve the beer or indeed the Guyanese food just by robots. You need staff. So don't underestimate tourism. It has an enormous potential for jobs, and also for jobs for the not highly qualified people who may get jobs in the oil and gas sector. Nothing wrong with that, but you need both. So it was a wonderful story of success in the interior of Guyana, and I was so happy. And I come from Guyana with a feeling of optimism. That's so much needed in today's world. Last week I was at a conference in Europe, and some of the top leaders of Europe said, the world is a horrible place. That we have an unprecedented crisis. There's never been a bigger crisis. Yes, we have a horrible war in Europe, but is the world in a worse place than during the Second World War, during the Black Death, during the time of slavery, during the time of the Cuba crisis when the world was on the verge of nuclear war? Is it really true that it has never been worse? Exactly the opposite is the case, ladies and gentlemen. We are living at the most beautiful time in human history. The average human being is much taller, much fatter, but that's much better than dying from hunger, much better educated, and in much better health than at any other point in human history. We have some wars, but it's not like these wars are more bloody than in the past. They are much less bloody than in the past. 3 million people died in the Vietnam War. 16% of the population of Ukraine died during the Second World War in Ukraine. How horrible the present war in Ukraine is. It's nothing like the Second World War in Ukraine. So let's leave aside this very negative worldview and put up the optimistic, can-do, opportunity worldview of the President of Guyana, and we will have a much better future together. And the main reason why we can do that is the rise of the global South. In the America and Europe, people are still so complacent they don't see it mainly. But it's visible for everyone else. Look, China is now the total dominant power on everything green in the world. 60% of all green is in China. Solar, wind, hydropower, electric batteries, electric cars, metros, whatever you can mention, China is at a minimum of 60%. Very often much more. On the production of solar panels, China is around 90% of the world production of solar panels, which is of course so needed for the green revolution. And India, the other big giant, is also moving very, very fast. 2 months ago, I went to Xinjiang province of China. That's the biggest solar plant in the world. How big is it? Well, it's 4 gigawatt. Look, ladies and gentlemen, that is 20 times the entire grid of Guyana. One plant, 20 times the full energy production of Guyana. But of course, you can compare to any other developing nation, still it's that gigantic. And it's 4 gigawatt now. By October, it will be 8 gigawatt. Next year, it will be 20 gigawatt, just this one plant. It's not small and cozy. It's like the ocean. You see solar panels to the horizon. It's enormous. But of course, it promotes any amount of renewable energy. Can Guyana learn from this? Yes, from the spirit and the private sector focus of the Chinese. But of course, Guyana has a smaller land mass. You have basically either forest or agriculture, but there may be savannas or other areas of Guyana which are well suited for solar. And more we now see solar combined with agriculture. In Mongolia and China, I saw how the people were raising chicken under the solar panels. They were growing tomatoes under the solar panels. So the farmer gets a double income from the panels and from his agriculture practice. And then, of course, you save a lot of land. Land is the big issue for solar. Guyana has a huge hydropower potential, which is untapped. We worked on that in the past. I understand that you try to revive that, and I really hope that can happen, because hydropower is now coming as one of the. Hydropower is still the most important renewable power in the world. Solar will surpass it, but at the moment hydropower is the biggest. And hydropower will play the role as the battery. Sun is not shining all the time. Wind is not blowing all the time, but then you use hydropower or pump storage as a battery for solar and wind. So I wish you all good luck in implementing this hydropower and also going big on solar in Guyana. I understand that Prime Minister Modi is coming here from India quite soon. Well, he's a champion, he's a hero of green development. When I was in the UN, I gave him the Champions of the Earth Award because of his many initiatives for green development. He has launched a scheme in India for 10, I mean, what the Indians say, 1 crore, that means 10 million rooftop solar. Well, that's big from Norwegian or Guyanese perspective, but 10 million. And it's a very simple scheme. You just register your interest by on your computer or on your phone, and the utility and the bank will take the risk, and they will put up the solar panel on your roof. You may take an interest in discussing this with Prime Minister Modi. Maybe he can provide some Indian expertise or knowledge when he comes here. Second, that was energy. Second area where the developing world is now leading is on transport. Green transport, again, China is the leader, but also India is going very fast. There is an Indian company called Ola, as the Uber of India. They see that as a way of really growing fast. They have a fantastic slogan. It says, Tesla for the West, Ola for the rest. Meaning, of course, they believe they can make very cheap electric scooters and electric cars for the global market, and they will produce them in India and sell them abroad. I was just in Delhi, speaking to the Minister of Transport in Delhi. He has established a new, very innovative scheme, which is that private innovators, private entrepreneurs will be able to run city buses in Delhi on a contract with the government, but they will be completely free to set the rate, and they will be completely free to decide on the routes. So that's quite innovative, and it's pushing the power down there to people who may know the situation better with the people than we can do in government systems. In the Indian city of Hyderabad, I was so happy to contribute to a new bike lane. It's 25 kilometers. It's fully covered by solar panels, so it's shade for the person. I mean, Hyderabad, like Georgetown, is a very hot place. So it's fully shaded by the solar panels, and of course the solar panels also bring energy. How did that happen? Well, I had put out a tweet showcasing that this had happened in South Korea. Then the chief minister of the state of Telangana said, can we do this in India? Then the bureaucrat said, no, Mr. Leader, we cannot do this in India. That can only happen in South Korea, not in India. Well, then the minister said, really? Really? The South Koreans are so much smarter than us Indians, we cannot do it? Well, and of course they did it, and now it's a wonderful, wonderful new bike lane. At the beginning, maybe mainly for exercising, but soon to be also a part of the city transport. I'm no expert of Georgetown, but this very, very long character of Georgetown should make it very well fit for quite a few bike lanes, which will carry basically everyone. I mean, no one wants to go biking in the traffic, where it's very dangerous. But if you can go a few blocks from your home to a wonderfully constructed bike lane, you may use it. And as from I can see from the maps, Georgetown should be very well suited for that. But I think the great people from the Prince Charles Foundation can discuss this with you if that is an opportunity. But there's a lot to be learned from China and India when it comes to green transport. If you go to Beijing today, you see absolutely not a single bus which is not electric. All buses are electric. All taxis are electric. 50% of new cars are electric. That's because the government give the incentive for people to change in that way, and it happens very, very fast. 10 years ago, Beijing was one of the most polluted cities in the world. I will never go running there. This winter, I went running 3 times in Beijing. Sky was blue, sun was shining, and I could inhale any amount of air, no problem whatsoever. It was not as clean as the rainforest of Guyana, but it was very, very clean and a huge change. So again, China and India provide so much lessons to be learned, not just for Guyana, but for everyone. Thirdly, energy and transport. And thirdly and last, let's use the nature and the protection of nature as a vehicle for jobs, prosperity, and for solving many problems. Here there are great examples from developing world. Costa Rica has doubled its tree cover in the last 3 decades. That's an amazing result. I'm not aware of any other nation which has doubled its tree cover. The President also mentioned Rwanda. Well, that's a small, landlocked nation in Africa. As you will recall, they went through this horrible genocide, but they came out of it, and it's now the shining star of development of Africa. On the environment, they're doing better than basically every other nation in Africa. And that the reason is they see it as an opportunity. They don't see environment and development as separate. It's like here, you have one low carbon strategy for development and environment. If you want to see the gorillas of Rwanda, which is the main attraction for foreign tourists, gorillas are wonderful. Well, it's not cheap. You have to pay $1,500 for 1 hour with the gorillas. So you have a family of 4, $4,000 American to see the gorillas in 1 hour. Maybe not fair, but it creates a fantastic economy for all the people there. They became the first line protectors of the gorillas because they are tourist guides, they're teachers, they're nurses, they're taxi drivers, they're working in the hotels. Their community depends on protecting Mother Earth. That's why they protect it. It's nearly impossible for any government to protect the nature if the local people are against it. That I'm sure is the case here also. because you cannot send the army to stop all problems. And no one can do that. So you need to bring in the local communities, and that's what they've done so wonderfully in Rwanda. And it's a place people normally don't think of. So if you have an interest, happy to connect to Rwanda to see how you can value your nature more. Maybe in Guyana, I don't know, that you can make more money from seeing pumas or jaguars or caimans or other animals, or again, pricing the assets in such a way that you get the maximum value for it. The world is new, and private sector is key to that. There's an Indonesian company which I'm close to. It's called RGE, Royal Golden Eagle. In the past, they were a big part of the problem. They had a lot of deforestation in the value chains. Well, now it's zero deforestation in the value chain. Not only that, the company is protecting a huge rainforest in Sumatra and Indonesia, and they're doing it much better than the government of Indonesia, not because there's anything wrong with the government of Indonesia, simply the government don't have the fire brigades and the helicopters and all the equipment which this private company do possess. So they protect the area. Now this Indonesian company has invested in Brazil. They have built the biggest and greenest and cleanest pulp factory in the world, 3 hours from Sao Paulo. And it's really this partnership of the New South, the Global South. It's an Indonesian company. All the staff, 100% of the people in the factory are Brazilians, but the main market is China, and it's financed by Chinese banks. So then you bring in 3 of the biggest developing nations in the world, China, Brazil, and Indonesia, into one value chain, which is immensely successful and helping protecting the forest because there will be absolutely zero deforestation involved in the paper and pulp factory they have set up in Sao Paulo. So the future of Guyana, I think, is bright. You have been able to solve major problems in the past. You have been able to put the nation on a low-carbon, environment-friendly development path, fully understanding that it's not one word of environment and another development. They must always come together. No one wants to say, I will suffer, my children should suffer to protect the environment. If I cannot bring education and food on the table for my children, I will not protect the environment. They must be brought together. But now the new challenge is, of course, the oil economy. I will not speak about that now. Maybe we can come back to that in the discussion with the Vice President. There will be new challenges, but I think you are very well positioned and prepared to make that a success. Some nations have failed when it comes to the use of the oil revenue. I won't mention any names, but there are also a number of successful nations. My nation, Norway, is one of them. Qatar is another one. United Arab Emirates is another one. Kazakhstan is another one. Botswana and Africa is another one. There are a number of successful raw material producing nations where Guyana may take an interest in having a dialogue on how they did it, not to copy anyone, but to look into whether there can be lessons to learn of interest for these wonderful nations. As a part of the Global South, Guyana will now be a leading nation in the world in the green transformation, which is the big issue for the 21st century. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Eric. Indeed, with the recognition of Guyana's role, but also in sharing those experiences of what developed countries are doing and what we as a developing country can follow in their models. So with that, I want to thank Mr. Eric Solem for that very informative statements that you have made. I would also now like to invite Honorable Vice President and again Mr. Eric to the panel discussion.
if it's empty.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pradeepa Bolnath, and I would like to commence this second half of today's session. Just testing. I was given 2 bits of advice from His Excellency the President when he asked me to perform this role here this afternoon. And the first is to be as tough on these 2 panelists as the BBC reporter, Hard Talk reporter, was on him a few months ago. And the second bit of advice was to not show them the questions beforehand. And I hope by the end of today's session that I would fulfill the first, and I've already fulfilled the second. So they have not seen these questions. I'll ask them 3 questions, and they'll both respond, starting with Vice President Jack Leo and former Minister Eric Solheim.
Start with Eric.
Absolutely. I'm already losing my ground
Right.
here.
Starting
with former Minister. Minister, the global forest crisis and the need for action. Both of you, yourself and Vice President Jack Leo, have been global leaders in identifying the critical role that forests play in addressing climate change and protecting biodiversity. Yet, every minute, the world loses about 20 hectares of tropical forest. And that is the reality that we live in. Given how obvious the importance of forests is to the climate solution, why is this still happening? And what can we learn from the Guyana experience in shaping solutions moving forward?
I think the main lessons I take away from Guyana is that you need to work with the local people. And you need to provide an alternative for the local people to any encroachment on the forest. Sometimes the encroachments on the forest are by individuals, sometimes of course it's by big companies. But you need, whatever is the reason, you need to provide an alternative living. Look at 20 million people living in Brazilian Amazon. They need alternative livelihoods if you want to stop the deforestation. That is number 1. But much linked to that is political leadership. Indonesia, until very recently, had very high deforestation rate. Now it's basically brought down to 0. Why is that? Well, the Jokowi government put in place all the right policies. Not even Greenpeace can find anything wrong with the policies which the Jokowi government made in Indonesia. And the big companies of Indonesia are on board because they understand we can make our money, we can make our jobs, we can make our shareholders happy without destroying any new forest, because we still have all the opportunities for palm oil or timber, which are the 2 main drivers in Indonesia. When Lula came in as the president in Brazil, we saw immediately a drastic drop in the deforestation just because of a new president. So political leadership and working with the local people, bringing them on board, making sure that the local people see benefits, not problems, from protecting the forest, I think are the most important.
Yeah, I think a lot has to do with the why do we still have forests losing, or why do we lose so much forest every year? And the world, which recognizes that forest is a part of the solution, without addressing deforestation, we could never really achieve net zero. Deforestation and land degradation creates about 16% of greenhouse gases. So I think it's lack of recognition globally that forests plays that role and needs to be supported. In Guyana's case, we have started off with this model building because of that same problem. Many years ago, 15 years ago, there was the recognition that forests might play an important role, but there was no support system for it. In the UNFCCC, 15 years later, that has not evolved. Forests are still not part of the offset mechanism. And so when we started the model building, we worked to address several issues. One, the global community was saying forests may be important, but can forest carbon really be permanent? Could it be measurable? Could we have kind of money earned from the sale of forest carbon be spent without corruption? Would indigenous people's rights be respected? Could you have a national buy-in in such a model? And there was a grave doubt that all of these things could be achieved in any model, and therefore many NGOs were part of fighting off forests as becoming part of an offset mechanism. They thought that this would provide an out for the developed world to lower their ambition. So we said, let's see in Guyana's case how we can address all of those concerns. And we got McKinsey and Company to do a study. The study showed that if we deforested, because we're a country that has low rates of deforestation, if we deforested 90% of our territory over 25 years and kept 10% with the highest conservation value, we could earn an annuity of $600 million. That's per year. We said, this is what we will need to outcompete alternate use of the forest. Secondly, we set up a mechanism where a multi-stakeholder mechanism. We had a widespread consultation nationally. We set up a robust MRV system. We put in place a mechanism so the resources could be spent without corruption. This was an important part. And so we answered every element that had become a problem by the global community, or they raised as a problem for not including forests as part of an offset mechanism. McKinsey and Company did a study at that time. They showed that the lowest cost abatement solution was forests and investing in forests. So the world knew that forests played an important role, yet it was unprepared to provide the support for forested countries that they were providing for other abatement solutions. And until now, we have not been able to convince the world to put in the resources at scale to tackle this problem. So that is why we still have this high rate of deforestation, because there are no global incentive at scale to tackle a very important global solution to the problem of climate change. And so this was tough at the beginning. It was tough at the beginning. We had two tasks. One, to prove the model, and secondly, to include countries that had high forest cover, as Eric pointed out earlier, because there are many who said, oh, those don't need any incentive. Only the ones who had high rates of deforestation. And that's why we were so pleased with King Charles, at that time Prince Charles, the work he did, Project Catalyst, McKinsey and Company. I spoke personally to Prime Minister Tony Blair, to Gordon Brown. We didn't get that support at that time. And the government of Norway and Eric's enlightened leadership led us to the creation of this model, which has been successful. We built the model around its replicability. And we proved that this could be sustainable, it could be measured, that people were going to get what they paid for. And in spite of that model proving, we still get the same questions raised 16 years later that were raised not to support the model at that time. And so I believe that these questions are just raised to prevent the resources going at scale. In Guyana's case, we have been successful in the sense that we got support from Norway and the deal with Hess. 30% of our forest carbon was sold to Hess for $750 million. But if we extrapolate at the same price, we'd probably get about $2.5 billion from a market-based mechanism. We have 1% of global forests. The 99% of the remaining global forests do not have now $2.5 billion in public funds dedicated to them. So if we want to save the forest and stop the 20 hectares or whatever you said, 20,000 hectares per year that we lose, we have to provide the incentive at scale and stop bickering and coming up with excuses about the model. The model has been proven. We can use these resources to support indigenous communities without encroaching on their land rights. We can get everyone involved. We can use the funds accountably. The $750 million, about 110 will go to the Amerindian communities. 640 million will go to adaptation in Guyana. Every cent will be audited. Every cent will be audited and properly spent and dedicated to climate objectives. So I believe it's time for the global community to step up and address this issue and provide the resources at scale.
Can I add one? Of course, I cannot agree more, but I think also Guyana is doing the right thing with mainly relying upon the global carbon market.
Yeah.
Because that's much more likely to provide more money than aid for the developed nations. I mean, developing nations are demanding this aid, and it's an absolute fair demand. I mean, look, American US emissions per capita are 25 times Indian emissions per capita. Still, sometimes Americans are finger pointing to India as if they were part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So the demand is absolutely fair. Just adopt, it will happen. But the carbon market will happen, and if I can take just 1 minute to explain why. Let's assume, I mean, Microsoft is probably the one company in the world which has made the most ambitious climate policy. They have said, we will go carbon neutral by 2030. They also said we will even compensate for all emissions in the history of Microsoft. But look, Google or Amazon, the big Chinese companies, the airlines of the world, you mentioned Hess as a partner of, they have all made similar promises. But there's no way they can do that without the carbon market. I mean, Microsoft can source the big data centers by solar, for sure. They can even put some of them on the sea floor and get cooling from the natural element. But there will still be a substantial rest. That rest can only be compensated by the carbon market, which is to support rainforest conservation, green agriculture, mangrove restoration, these kind of things. So that this market is doomed to go big.
But
so
Eric,
please go into that.
even if we have a carbon market and it's growing, the problem is that forested countries can't benefit from that market because until now, Article 6 has not been approved and through the UNFCCC framework, and forest carbon can't be used as offset like carbon traded in the EU ETS. So 2 battles to grow the carbon market itself, and we need a carbon price, a global carbon price, something that we've argued for a long time, and then we need the forested countries to be able to access that market. In Guyana's case, we've moved from the bilateral deal with Norway at $5 per ton or so, and that was great at that time. And now we sold to Hess with a range of $15, $20, and $25 per ton. But the global markets, the formal markets, the compliance markets, are traded nearly at $100 per ton. And we are having a hard time, countries like ours, getting much any more of the carbon sold or forest carbon sold, especially other countries, because it's just a voluntary market. We have now evolved to the CORSIA, the first compliance market, but when would we be able to access a UNFCCC compliance market? That's the only time that you can really value forest carbon at, well, put a true value to forest carbon. Of course, with its biodiversity benefits, etc., it would be a high quality carbon.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, jointly we need to overcome all these, frankly, very theoretical people who put up all sorts of obstacles. We need a much simpler system which works out in the real world. Look, I mean, back in the days in the UN, I was part of that. We developed something was called the Green Development Mechanism. At the end of the day, nearly all money went to China.
Yes.
Not because China really wanted that or demanded that, because you made such a complicated system, it could not be used in Africa or in indeed any other developing world. It could only be used for massive programs like, say, Chinese hydropower plants, because that only when you were that big, you can pay for all the cost of the intermediaries, etc.
Yeah.
You made it so complicated that it can't work. And some of these guys are daily struggling to make the system complicated rather than simple and effective.
And so that brings us back to the point. We have answered every question raised by those who are opposed to forests becoming part of a compliance market. The permanence, measurability, the use of the resources, respecting indigenous people's right, national buying, and all of that. I remember the early days when we were consulting locally on the LCDS. I had a meeting with the miners at the Tower Hotel here, and they said, oh, you're going to shut down mining in Guyana. And they were opposed. And we had to sit and talk to the miners. That was not the intention. So we had a tough work locally to get a buy-in into the LCDS too. But this global nitpicking sometimes that takes place within the UNFCCC framework has not lent itself to an arrangement where forested countries can get the resources at scale through a market-based mechanism, because it's not coming from public funds, to outcompete alternate use for the forest, because that's the only way you preserve forests, not through just philanthropy or doing good, but outcompeting alternate use of the forest. And so that's the battle today as it was 16 years ago.
Thank you both very much. Inspiring comments indeed. And that delicate balance across science, policy, and having to be driven by political will through the leadership of yourselves 15 years ago. It's indeed inspiring to see what has been achieved and what could be achieved as we move into the future.
He was crucial to this.
Absolutely crucial.
I remember at that time, we didn't have much money as a country, We didn't have start producing oil.
Yeah.
So we used to check the price of the hotels before when we go to the UN and in Manhattan and stay at the cheap hotels. Yeah. And once Eric came to that seedy hotel that we were staying in as president. So personally, Eric made a difference at that time. And I want to acknowledge it and thank you for coming back to Guyana publicly.
Absolutely.
Because
Allow me to add to that story, because when I came to your suite in this relatively modest New York hotel, I was very impressed. Because I think, well, this is a leader who takes his people seriously, who won't spend all of the money of the people going on the best hotels in New York. Look, I've been to, I won't mention the name, but some very good friends of mine, presidents of some developing nations, and they go to Waldorf Astoria. You pay $20 just for a cup of coffee there, $20 for a small cup of coffee. And, well, it's the taxpayers' money of that nation which is spent that way. That is not giving me confidence in that leader. So when I came to your modest suite, I think, so this guy is serious. He wants to develop his nation.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you very much, Minister. As we move to oil and gas and climate action, both Guyana and Norway are oil producers, something that wasn't the case 15 years ago for Guyana. Today, Guyana is investing oil revenues heavily in health, education, and economic development. Yet, some argue that the country should leave the oil in the ground. At the same time, we see global leaders debating the terms of phasing out, phasing down, transitioning away, various terminologies, from fossil fuels. Are these just slogans, or do they meaningfully contribute to advancing climate action? Does framing the debate this way even helps, or does it hinder development policies? And is it really making a difference, or is it hurting the debate?
I think it's hurting the debate when people from nations which have benefited enormous from oil or from other industrial development are finger pointing to Guyana and say, oh, you should not develop the oil. I mean, how can we, I'm Norway, how can we tell Guyana it should wait with its oil? But how can Russia or Saudi Arabia or indeed the United States of America finger point to any other nation that it should stop its oil production? It simply, it won't work, no one will do it, and it's simply arrogance of the first order. But of course the future is not with the oil. Future is with renewables, and I'm sure the Vice President and myself will completely agree in that. But the price of solar and wind is now dropping so fast. Guyana also need to be prepared for, say, if there is peace in Ukraine, which we all hope for, the oil price will come down substantially, which will of course give less revenue for Guyana. So, but to say that Guyana should not do this is, in my view, simple, pure and simple arrogance. The issue is, how can Guyana benefit from this for the people of Guyana? And if you look to other nations in similar circumstances, including my own Norway, I have a few advice. One, the financial system must be completely transparent, because there's super profits in the oil. There are no super profits in solar panels, but in oil there are super profits. And people will be tempted to pocket them for themselves. Only transparency can make sure, even if there are no one corrupt, people can feel that they don't get the benefit. So please make sure it's absolutely transparent on the financial side. Secondly, look into how we, and the President also spoke about that, how can you have moral jobs? Not, I mean, in some African countries, the oil companies just come in as a parachute organization. They buy nothing in the nation. They just take out the oil and have the profit, and sometimes share some with the government of that place. But they don't even buy the food. They don't even buy the beer. They bring everything in. Yes. Look into, I mean, the big success of my nation, Norway, in this area is that, yes, we have the oil companies, but you have a huge amount of smaller companies who have developed different technologies, who provide different services. Of course, you provide the food and the drinks and the hotel standards and all this. So look into how you can get, because the jobs are not in the production of oil. That's a very, very highly efficient way, but get all the other jobs. And then, of course, at the end of the day, which you have started on, how to turn these revenue into education, health, roads, better housing. And Georgetown will, I think, double its size. It will for sure be much, much bigger. So preparing for that, looking into how we should do city planning, how we can make a city of better livelihood, or even better, with more people. It's a first order issue. I mean, again, Dubai was not, if you see a photo of Dubai 1970, there was a few nomads running around the place. Nothing. Yeah. Now it's the most modern city in the world, maybe in comparison with China. Absolutely modern. Kazakhstan, which has a much bigger nation, they have been able to use the oil money to develop a new capital, Astana. Absolutely modern, marvelous architecture, very, very people-friendly city, as I can see it, in the coldest place on planet Earth. So there are some success stories as to how to do this, which you may look into, but don't let anyone tell you you should not utilize the resources for the people of Guyana.
Vice President?
Yeah, so before I answer the issue of how the debate is framed globally, I just wanted to say to Eric, we've taken the global experience seriously on management of oil resources. So one of the first things we did, there was a sovereign wealth fund established. one of the first things we did when we returned to office is to put in a provision that any receipt from oil and gas companies, big or small, would have to be notified to the Parliament and published in the official gazette within 3 months of the receipt. Failing to do so can lead to the Minister of Finance going to jail for 10 years. I don't think even in the developed world we have such a harsh provision. So the Parliament gets notified, and also it's in the official gazette. So at the end of the year, you can get copies of the official gazette, which is a public document, and you will, if you total down, you would find out even before the minister presents his report how much we collected in oil and gas. We remove any charge on the sovereign wealth fund. So no direct charge on the sovereign wealth fund. So every expenditure of oil money will have to go through an appropriation process that is through the Parliament. You can't spend money outside of the appropriation process. There are lots of other provisions, but I just wanted to mention those two.
Wonderful.
Then the same point you're making about the local benefits. They're not going to come in large number of jobs because it's capital intensive. So we pass a Local Content Act. As a result of it, this year we expect some $700 million to be spent in our economy on over 1,000 local companies with procurement opportunities. That would not have happened had we not passed the law. And so there's some carve-outs for local. Security services, cleaning services, rental services, transport services. These companies by law now have to procure those opportunities from local companies. And so we recognize that it's not in the jobs necessarily, but in the procurement opportunities, the business opportunities that will happen. Those are just two provisions. But the question of how the debate is framed globally, is it fossil fuel or no fossil fuel? It is hampering progress at the UN negotiations again. Every time we go to the negotiations, you have one group of people saying, end fossil fuel now, and then the others saying, let's hang on to fossil fuel a while longer. And so that doesn't look at the complex problem. So the idea is not just ending fossil fuel. It is about achieving net zero, ensuring that we are on a sustainable trajectory, that we keep global temperature from rising above 1.5 degrees by 2050. Although, in many ways, I think we've gone past that target already. So that's the objective. And how do you get there? It's much more complex. We believe the solution is in an equation. A number of things can be the solution, some are measures. Taking simultaneously or working together can lead to that outcome. It's not just fossil fuel, ending fossil fuel. Clearly, we have to reduce fossil fuel production. That's part of the solution. And we have to start with the most polluting of the fuels, like coal. But we saw the reality of the situation is that when countries are faced with major demand from their people, like what happened in, say, the UK after the war in Ukraine, and prices went up. A lot of the commitment, the UK was leading the charge at Glasgow to ban basically coal production. They open up some coal-fired power plants again. So you have to look at the reality, the real politics of it. But notwithstanding that, so clearly the first element of the solution to get to net zero has to be some phasing down of fossil fuel or phasing out, whatever the outcome is, over time, but it must not be disruptive to people's lives or push up costs too much, or they would rebel against it. Look at the United States. People talk about energy costs. It's a political issue. It's a political issue, and politicians can't ignore that. If your price skyrockets of utility, people don't care about net zero. They worry about the cost of living. So that's one part of the solution. The second has to be a large-scale introduction of renewables. Therefore, resources at scale must flow to the introduction of renewable energy so that they can outcompete or fill any future demand or rise in demand. And that rise in demand for energy doesn't have to be filled by expansion of fossil fuel production, but can be met by renewables. But that's not happening because there is no major global incentive for that to happen at scale. And the one single thing that can do that is to have a global carbon price. That will solve that problem. But we're now closer to that. The third element has to be reduction of deforestation. So, and then fourthly, technology. Because even if we can remove some of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, then that's part of the solution. So I believe that all of these potential solutions or all these measures should be worked on simultaneously to achieve the balance. The obsession is fossil fuel or no fossil fuel. And that's the framing of the debate in that manner causes this problem. And that's why we have not seen much success there, because nobody is prepared to look at the other solutions. And so I guess we have to reframe it and look at it as a balance. This is about a balance in the atmosphere. It's not just about fossil fuel. And the problem too is you cannot trap the developing world in Africa or India in this low carbon, low development trajectory. So they need to grow too. They need to grow. And sometimes the debate is when they come and say to us, stop producing, it's like we have to remain poor or underdeveloped to get to net zero when the developed world has already still producing fossil fuel and expanding the production, and they already on a per capita basis have 10 times, emit 10 times the amount that we do. But we have to now be trapped in this low development. So what about the people in Africa, the 800 million people in Asia or Africa who don't have access to energy as yet? Are we going to leave them like that because we just want this objective to achieve net zero? So there has to be justice in all of this. We're producing oil and gas now, but we've still maintained the position we took before, Eric. We support a carbon price, which is penalizing fossil fuel production, although we are a producer of oil. Two, we support, you heard the president mention it, the removal of subsidy from fossil fuel production. Very few energy producers or oil producers support those two objectives. Norway and Guyana might, not the others.
Well, I have a maybe kind of cynical view, but oil and coal will not be phased out by government decisions, nor will it be phased out by decisions in the United Nations or the United Conference. What will phase out oil and gas? Well, that is Tongwei, Jinko, Longi, that's Goldwinds and Envision. Well, these are the biggest Chinese solar and wind companies. And there are similar companies in other nations, but not so big. Well, they are the people who bring down the price of solar and wind so it is cheaper. Everywhere in the world now, everywhere in the world, solar is cheaper than oil and cheaper than coal. There are issues, to prepare the grid, you may need battery, you need space and permissions, there are some issues, but solar is cheaper, and that will phase out oil, not any political decision.
Yeah, the problem with solar here too, Eric, is when it can't be base load, it's energy. So it's not capacity. And a point you made about the hydro, because as you said, when it doesn't, there's no sunshine and it's rain covered for a few years, we can't go without energy. So that will happen over time, I agree, but should we have this carbon price that penalizes externality caused by the use of fossil fuel, then that's the biggest incentive for producers of green technology, not in China alone, because in China they may have government support, but in other places where they have to compete without government support, that would all of the producers of green technology will then say, we can make this investment and it would be sustainable. And it doesn't depend on an election cycle in a country. Because if one party gets into power, they will change it.
But of course, Guyana can use its new oil revenue, as you say, to invest also in the renewables. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, United Arab Emirates,
Yes.
as an example, is a nation which do that at a big scale.
Yes.
Saudi Arabia have given all indications that they want to go in the same direction. And then take a look at the latest bid in the Indian state of Gujarat, where they've integrated solar with battery storage, and still it's cheaper. Still it's cheaper than fossils, even with that integration. But of course, you have the opportunity of solar with hydro as the base load. But even if oil and gas is used as the base load, it's still better,
Yes.
much better. And of course, I know you're planning a gas power
Gas
plant,
power plant.
but that can be used in combination with,
With
solar and
that's
other.
the energy mix.
Yeah.
Because our using gas, everything now is bunker and diesel. So going to gas cuts our emissions significantly, and the cost, it will be about 4 cents per kilowatt hour. On solar, the bids that are coming in, because the bigger countries get lower bids. A country like ours with a small demand, with battery, it comes in about maybe 10, 11 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's the range now. And hydro may come in around 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So these are the variables we're looking at. But on a global scale, I'm talking, not just about Guyana. We need this on a global scale. That's when we wouldn't need the expansion of fossil fuel facilities. Because if the demand is growing and you can't meet it from renewable energy, you just have to ramp up fossil fuel production, which is what's happening now.
Okay, thank you very much for those reflections. Dose of reality, but I think something that many countries grapple with and have to feature into their policy making, because at the end of the day, it's making the best decision for the people. And that is a good segue to my final question to you both. We have the upcoming Conference of Parties on the Convention on Biological Diversity in Colombia in a few weeks' time, COP16. And then we have the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change meeting, COP29, coming up a bit after that in Azerbaijan. There is a clear division between developed countries and developing countries in the positions that are taken. How do we bridge that divide to bring everyone on board in speaking about the environment and forests and seeing forests as that great unifier in terms of the solution, a major solution to action on climate? What is the single main thing that could be done to bridge that divide?
I think the main thing is something which is very different from the conferences, because these conferences will, I'm sorry to say, will bring very little. They are,
I share that view.
they are more like festivals and fairs where people, you have a fair in a community, everyone is coming together, you can make some deals, you can have some happiness, you can speak about the issues, but the kind of documents and negotiations will bring next to nothing. What is changing the world now, I spoke about it earlier, that is the decisions made by political leaders, mainly in the global south. By President Xi Jinping of China, Prime Minister Modi of India, President Lula of Brazil, and Prabowo, which is the new president of Indonesia, and indeed of the president and vice president here. They make progressive decisions, which is framing the market. And then many companies are far ahead of politics. Look, when President Trump took the United States out of the Paris Agreement, was there any American company which raised the hand and said, "Wonderful, Mr. President, this was the right thing to do"? They all said, we will continue with environment and climate efforts, even if that's not the order from the president. That was the message from Microsoft and Google and Amazon and all the big companies in the modern economy of the United States. And look, I mean, as an example, I have worked somewhat with Mr. Adani. He's now the second richest Indian. He made his money from coal. Now he's massively going into solar and wind. He's setting up in Gujarat in India what will be the biggest solar and wind combined facility in the world is 30 gigawatt. Well, that is two, 300 times the entire energy production of Guyana, just from this one facility. And so business and individual government leaders are driving the change, not these documents from the conferences. And the big, I mean, as you said, the big quarrel in Dubai last year was the exact formulation of how to phase out oil. It basically will have no impact on oil production in the world whatsoever.
Yeah. So Eric, you've been working with India and China and the large countries. But so what's happening, as you pointed out, are important part of moving closer to net zero. But the smaller countries of the world depend on this framework. They don't have the same power, economic power and scale as India or China. So they depend on the framework for justice often too. So adaptation resources that were promised have not been flowing to the developing world. Their capacity to change, they want to prepare their economies, make their countries climate resilient. They simply don't have the resources. Take CARICOM countries. They're debt stressed. They have maybe a single sector producing most of their gross domestic product. They have a whole range of other problems, low economic growth. Therefore, they don't have resources to do that. They depend on the UNFCCC framework. So no movement forward is a tragedy for these countries. And they can't be part of that solution. They're just left behind. So you may just have... So this is why we have to invest our efforts there. Secondly, we've seen the evolution from common but differentiated responsibility, the principle that was established in Bali to recognize different levels of emission and also strength, economic strength, and who should support the global transition, to now almost equal burden sharing. The framework has changed, meandered over the years to a principle that we were opposed to. When I was part of the high-level UN Secretary General Committee on raising $100 billion per year, we were fighting off, you had Mr. Larry Summers and others on that committee, and we were fighting off one thing. We were saying, don't shift the burden to the developing world. And that is what it was for being responsible and funding that responsibility. And that's what seemed to be happening. So for the big countries, they see an economic opportunity. China sees an economic opportunity in green technology. So it's investing there. Not necessarily because of a climate objective, but they will make money from this. The United States, through its Inflation Reduction Act, has given a huge subsidy to people who are in green technology. But what about countries like ours? We depend on multilateralism and the UN framework. And when it doesn't move forward, we can't get a framework for forests, we can't get adaptation money, we walk away with very little. And the biggest impact of climate change is on these countries. So we have to still go there in spite of my skepticism and yours. We still have to engage in a battle to ensure that the framework advances. Because without that framework, we're not and that the resources are pledged at scale and that the developed world meet their obligations. The promises that they made are delivered, the pledges. Again, the president spoke about it. The pledges are made and often not delivered. The Commonwealth, when I chaired that group, we demonstrated this over and over again. And so we have to continue the battle in spite of all the skepticism that we go to the meetings with. We have to battle this. And we expect support from the countries, including the developed world, to push the agenda forward, the global agenda forward, the framework forward, because it might be more important for smaller countries than the larger ones.
No, I mean, this is fully agreed. I mean, there is a difference between, say, China and India, which are markets of 1.4 billion people each. India now being bigger than China, a market soon of 1.5 billion. It's one market. If you make something in Tamil Nadu in southern India, you can sell it in Arunachal Pradesh in northern India. And there's this one market, one grid, one set of rules, basically, yes. And one strong leader in Prime Minister Modi. Of course, it's a huge advantage compared to smaller developing nations. But that's also why China and India are providing so much leadership. I mean, we are in 100% agreement on what should be done. Yeah. Just that I'm watching what is actually happening.
Yes,
What's happening in Europe and the United States at the moment is that politicians are very preoccupied with Ukraine for basically, I think, for good reasons. But that means that development assistance is not gone down. Just a huge amount of the development assistance has been channeled to Ukraine. Which means much less resources for Africa and other parts of the world. That happened in Norway, happened in many other nations. So there's simply much less money. And at the moment, there's not this strong leadership anywhere. Yes, Biden has provided a strong domestic leadership for the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act, but he has not provided anything like a global leadership on climate issues. And no European leaders are doing that at the moment. They have other preoccupations. So that's why if I were a leader in a nation like Guyana, I would spend more time on getting the rules for the carbon credit market right, because that's more likely to succeed, more likely to bring more money. But you are right, I mean, the rules must be simplified and so they can work. But that's much more likely to bring substantial money. I was invited by the president of Sri Lanka after the the financial crisis there to be his advisor. What I advised him is, if you spend your time trying to get more development aid, in all likelihood you will fail. If you spend your time on the carbon credit market, where Sri Lanka has huge opportunities, say, for mangroves, or you spend your time on getting private investment into solar and wind and other opportunities, then you are much more likely to succeed. So this is just a rational policy to be more likely to succeed. Morally, we are 100% in agreement.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Thank you very much, Ms. Solnit.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you for your visionary leadership and invite everyone to stand, please, as we recognize the work of these two gentlemen.
Okay.
Should we get
We have a couple. Okay,
you open to some more questions? Will you be open to some questions from the audience?
Okay, all right, go on. Absolutely. Oh, okay, all right.
So I've been asked to undertake a second task, and I have graciously agreed to do so, to take a few questions from the audience, because you've sat here with us for the last 2 hours.
Just got them.
If you can show by maybe a raise of hands, we can take maybe 3 to 5 questions. We will take them all at once, and then we will do one round of responses, please. Super. So we will take 2, if we can have. Yes, please, go ahead. I think your microphone should work, but if it doesn't, we can hear you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alfonso. Thank you for this conversation. It's really enlightening. One of the things that I took away is that resources at scale are needed really to unlock or to move countries like us, like ours, into the future, right? To save us from from climate change. And something that I heard is that a lack of a globally accepted carbon market or carbon price is a bugbear. Did I get that correctly? So there's no global market carbon acceptable carbon
All
price,
right, we
right?
can respond.
What more can countries like Guyana do through bilateral or multilateral strategies to really unlock this?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that young lady next.
Please go ahead. Can you just press the button on the, yeah.
Okay. Hi. I don't know if I should give an introduction. Hi, I'm Aruni Celia. I attend University of Ghana. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My question is, what information is there to prove that the LCDS model can be successfully applied to developed nations to reduce their deforestation rates? And I say this to ask, Guyana, even 15 years ago, with a deforestation rate of 0.056%, was not a major contributor to deforestation. And from 2010 to 2020, they had an average deforestation rate of about 0.059%. And I'm sure now it would be about 10 times lower than the global tropical deforestation rate. I'm wondering, how do you rebut the claims or potential claims that Guyana's success has been due to its already low impact and the tropical structure of its economy instead of the model?
Thank you. Two more? Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. Nathan Prince. I'm a student within the Department of Biology at UG. So it was mentioned that size does not limit the potential and possible growth our country can have. Also, throughout the presentation, it was made clear that Guyana has all of these plans for LCDS. We have all of the resources, but yet still there seems to be a roadblock. Mr. President would have mentioned all of these are admirable and even ambitious plans the government has to maintain sustainability. But again, yet still, it seems like there is some amount of roadblock in terms of actual movement and actual action with LCDS. So my question is, what exactly is stopping the more expansive action and work with all the areas of LCDS, especially as it relates to youth involvement?
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. We go to, okay, if no other questions, we could go to some responses. Perhaps we can start with Minister. The three questions, the first one touched on resources at scale and what really is needed to make that a reality with reference to global carbon pricing and subsidies in fossil fuel. The second question has to do with the LCDS and how do we really replicate that model at the level of the developed world, recognizing that Guyana has always maintained its status as high forest cover, low deforestation rate. And how do we remove those roadblocks that exist in integrating biodiversity and creating a crediting market that is under the UN framework? How do we bridge that divide?
First, when it comes to the idea of a global carbon price, which also was proposed by my friend Bharat, I cannot agree more. It's a fantastic proposition. It should have happened 10 years ago. It's still a very good idea. However, will it happen? I'm very doubtful. I was chief negotiator for this within the UN Global UN Climate Convention, and I came to the conclusion it's highly unlikely it will happen. You have a European carbon price. You will probably soon have a Chinese carbon price. You may have a carbon price for parts of the United States of America, the most, let's say, democratic northwestern states like California. And you may have, over time, the same in India. But a global one will be very, very difficult because simply of the geopolitics. but still it's a great idea. And sometimes in history, things are simmering until it just happens, because people see the seriousness of the issue. Then on the low carbon strategy of Guyana, I believe the main elements are as valuable for any developing nation. I mean, of course, you cannot copy the details because they're specific from any nation. Guyana cannot even copy, say, Suriname. They're separate nations. Nor can Guyana cannot copy the United States or China or India, and nor can we in Europe copy Guyana. But the main elements, political leadership is key everywhere. If the political leaders are not driving development and not driving the environment in the nation, it simply won't happen. Yes, we can have any number of good grassroots initiatives, and I wish them all well, but you need that political leadership. And another element, to look for the benefits for the local communities, that basically is the same everywhere. When I was Minister of Environment in Norway, which is a much richer nation than Guyana, if we tried to implement national parks above the head of the local people, it always failed, because they were up in arms. They protested, and they didn't even accept the rules. And we couldn't send the police or the army to put them in place. So you need to have a dialogue with them. And many times I made some compromises with the, say, local farmers. And then they said, yes, with these compromises, we are all on board, and this is a good idea for our community. That approach, I think, is universal. And it will be even more important in the future, because solar farms and windmills, again, they're not small and cozy. They demand a lot of land, and local people must see a benefit. Part of the windfall from that must be with the local people. If they don't see a financial benefit, it will fail. And finally, which that hinted to, geopolitics is a major issue. The President mentioned the new tariffs which are put in place on Chinese electric vehicles. Well, that will for sure make the transition to electric vehicles in Europe and America much slower. Much slower. Take many more years, because these are the most advanced and most cheap electric vehicles which are available in the world. Why are they so cheap? Because China, as you said, had an enormous domestic market. I mean, we in Europe complained that there were subsidies. Well, subsidies for green products, that's what we have all argued we should have. We should stop subsidizing fossil fuels. We should subsidize the green development. So let's assume that China has subsidized the electric vehicles, which is all and good. But the main issue is not that. Just that when you have a market of 1.4 billion people, which is a very demanding market, high quality market, when you make some product for that market, the price will be very low. And when you then start exporting, of course the price is very low. So any nation in the world now trying to go electric or go solar without China, yes, they can do it, but just it will take much longer because it will be much more costly. What the West should do, in my view, that's to invite the Chinese companies to invest in the United States, to invest in Europe. Then we will get the jobs and we will get the technology transfer. In the past, Europe and America was investing in China. Well, now as time has come for the reverse, invite them to invest, share the technology, provide the jobs, and of course exactly the same applies to Latin America and other parts of the world. BYD, which is the biggest Chinese electric vehicle company, has promised some major investments in Brazil. That's an example of this technology transfer and partnership which will bring the way forward. So the West should stop putting tariffs and start inviting partnership, joint ventures, and investment from China, and by the way also from India, into the West to supercharge the green revolution.
Thank you, Marissa.
Yeah, so on the carbon price question that Alfonso asked, right now, so carbon price could come from either tax, for some countries use a tax mechanism, or the cap and trade system. So like Europe goes through the cap and trade, the EU ETS, you trade carbon there. But there is no global market at this stage. And even in the UNFCCC mechanism, they tell you what you can use to offset emission, what will be allowed. Our argument is that forest carbon cannot go into the compliance market. So if we wanted to take our carbon now and trade it in the EU ETS or another carbon market at the national level, those companies can't use our carbon as an offset for their emissions. That is why it's so lowly priced, and it's only basically because it's traded in the voluntary market. So we are saying there should be a carbon price. We in Guyana have one price. We did it for oil and gas emissions. So there's a no flaring policy. And if you flare beyond the commissioning, the oil and gas companies now have to pay a carbon tax at $50 per ton. So we have introduced that since we got back into office. So we have it specific to oil and gas emissions and flaring, because we have a no flaring policy here. But unless this is developed, then you can't really give the incentive to the other sectors. And that's what the point we are making about you need that carbon market, and it needs to be globalized. So young lady asked basically, because we've always been a heavily forested country, so is it because of a model or because of just past how we are? But the question is, we remain a high forest, HFLD country, largely because of a choice we made over time. In spite of growing demand to cut down the trees, we have decided that we'd have a sustainable approach. I just told you about the McKinsey report that was done. And what if we were to deploy? What would be the opportunity cost of keeping these forests rather than deploying the land into alternate use? So that was what the model was built around. And our forests are intact, largely because we have a world-class MRV system. We track every change in the forest. Our forest laws were strengthened. So if you have to cut a single tree, you have to inventorize, get a permit, inventorize the forest, then come up with an annual extraction plan. Then you have to get tags, a number of tags before you extract a single tree. We don't clear fell, we don't allow that. It's a choice that we've made. So the model in the past was those countries that were cutting down their trees were going to get money from the global community, and those that were practicing good policies, keeping their forests intact in spite of the demand to use the forest, they were not going to get any money. And that was the argument to create a second model. So one model for countries that need to stop their emission rate or their deforestation rate, and others more of a conservation to support them to keep their forests intact. We work on that together to prove that the second model is good policy too. And that's the model building. So the model building has not about how our forests are intact, but globally that you need to incentivize these two groups these two models. One to stop deforestation, and others to keep their forests intact. So that was what the model building was all about. And then the young man spoke about youth involvement. So right from the beginning, when I set up the multi-stakeholders meeting, we had on that the indigenous NGOs, we had the miners, for people in the forestry sector, young people, women, all the sectors, academia. And once a month we used to meet, chaired as president, and we discussed the LCDS through. That's how the model was built. So young people were involved. The money that we earn, we have dedicated it to different sectors. And if you look at the growth in these sectors, for example, indigenous people and the ICT program, we have done that. Land titling was another one. Some adaptation measures. Some people got small loans from the LCDS funds. Some of it will go towards the solar farm that the president is speaking from, just from the first set of resources. The second set, it will go mainly to adaptation. And young people are involved. So we don't say like now, we can say we're building several cricket well, not cricket stadium. We're fixing all the grounds in Georgetown, all 34. We don't say it's LCDS, but it's part, young people are part of our strategy overall. And they were involved at the highest level. And until now, President Ali still has retained that structure, and he meets with a group, the similar group, with young people involved. So they're part of that high-level discussion on the expanded LCDS and the implementation of the programs. So young people are fully involved. If you look at the village levels in the Amerindian communities, it's unbelievable how many young people are involved. Many of the Tushos themselves are young people, and along the coast too. So, thank you.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please, may we stand and thank these two visionaries for their work on climate and forest. Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Great motivation.
I didn't interrupt a single time.
No. It's okay. All right, then. Very good. All right.